So yeah, let's get started. Welcome, dear guests and viewers. My name is Ahmet Selimoğlu, coming to you from the University of Texas at Austin. I'll be your host today. Our topic today is an important one. It's about social polarization. Today, much of the world is in a digital struggle, polarized by social media. The artificial intelligence algorithms that run these platforms have started showing signs of a dystopian Skynet. We depend on these robots we depend on robots in general, really, to farm our crops, drive us to work, get us some Grubhub, cook our food. But sometimes robots and algorithms, even though they're an essential part of life, we tend to overlook some of their flaws, especially those robots that are working behind the screens. Well, obviously, we can't do much with that we can't see. And they say that the greatest trick the devil has ever pulled was convincing the world that he did not exist. Look, I'm not saying that the devil infiltrated the media in some way. I'm just saying he doesn't need to. We've seen how social media can bring the worst in people at times, especially at recent times. Speaking of the digital struggle and the strategies to hold ourselves accountable, we have the first of our two guest speakers for you today, Reverend Crystal Silva McCormick from the Church of the Savior. Let me introduce you to her. Crystal is currently working as an educational network intern at Asociación para la Educación Teológica Hispana. She is also an instructor at the Department of Religious Studies at St. Edward's University and an adjunct professor at the theology department at Texas Lutheran University. Over the years, besides teaching, she has been an associate pastor of Christian education and youth ministry, chaplain, and social worker. Crystal always seeks to keep her focus on marginalized people and groups, not out of her own interest, but as her firm belief that this is the central teaching of Jesus' message. She's currently working on her doctorate in Christian-Muslim relations and interfaith studies with Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. And previously, she's earned her theology master's and history of Christian-Muslim relations, Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, Master of Divinity, Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary at Austin, Texas, and Bachelor of Arts of Missiology at Lubbock Christian University at Lubbock, Texas. She's also ordained with UCC native. She's also a native Texan, and Reverend Crystal has 5 children with her husband of Adam of 20 years. Again, that's her introduction, and I'm going to pull Crystal right onto the screen for her to be able to introduce herself.
Good evening, and thank you all for having me as part of this conversation and for the work that you do in the community. I don't think I need to say anything. I'm just like everyone else, and that's a very generous introduction. I'm just glad to be here. I'm talking about this topic, which I think is more than timely. Probably, if we think of, in my mind, if we all think of the phrase social polarization, we might think about a recent historic and tragic event, which would be the attack at the Capitol. And so, because there was so much conversation and still is important conversation about the role that social media and social polarization have played in what resulted in the violence that resulted that day. And so I think that even before that, we, as Ahmed very, wisely said, that all that we're connected to technology in so many ways. And so that's something that I wanted to raise, the positives and the negatives. But I think that I wanted for us to reflect individually, to ask ourselves what it means to be polarized socially. I don't know what comes to your mind when I say that. What does it mean to be polarized socially? When I say that phrase, what does that mean to us? And if we think about it, does that have something to do specifically with technology, or were we already a polarized society prior to just the proliferation of the way that we use technology and access technology? Were we already a very polarized society? And is social media and technology just another way for us to really feel and see how polarized we are? I'm not sure that I know the answers to those questions, but I think that the questions are important for us to ask and to reflect on, because either way, regardless of how we answer those questions, we are stuck with how do we address the polarization, because technology is not going anywhere. We rely on it for the many things that Ahmed listed and named, and it has benefit, I'm sure, right? How many of you are able to access family and friends that maybe you wouldn't have, or maybe it would have cost you $100 to speak to them, to speak to somebody across the globe prior to the age of technology, which now not only can you do that for free, but you can see their faces. And so we have the benefits of technology. And I'm sure there are many other benefits that you all can probably think of, but that's one that comes to mind that social media provides in such a profound way. I had a family member die in Mexico, and due to COVID could not travel. It was my mom's last living sibling, my aunt. And so we were able to participate in a lot of memorial activities online. And we could not have done that before. So I'm mindful of those questions, but I'm mindful of what we saw in the attack on the Capitol and what led up to it, and the role of technology for us to reflect on. And so I think those are important questions. And I'm sorry, Ahmed, was I supposed to keep going, or were you supposed to? I'm sorry, did I miss?
Yeah, so absolutely. I agree that social media in general is a tool. We can use it for good or bad. And I wanted to actually, create this discussion where, you had some time to talk, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then we can move on to our next guest. But if you prefer, we can open it for discussion if you want to ask us questions, me and Dr. Sawyer.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure I just gave time. What I have to reflect on further is just the role of faith from my perspective as a Christian, and when I think about polarization, right? And so if that's okay, then I'll just say a little more about that, and then leave time certainly for my colleague and our friend to continue. I think of the fact that we probably all strive for peace, right? Especially in Islam, the foundation even of the name of Islam, rooted in peace. And we, as a society want peace. And I don't know how much social media gives us peace, whether it be the excessive use of technology for all of us, from our children to, all the way to seniors, but also the fact that I think when there is so much negativity online, it's an expression of something else. It's an expression of something else going on. And so I'm mindful of people who are trying to be heard. And that doesn't mean that just because someone is trying to be heard that they are right, or what they're angry about is right. But I am mindful that when someone is angry, they want to get attention. Sometimes people on social media are proclaiming they want justice. Sometimes they are expressing their anger. Sometimes they are expressing their desire to protect others or for others to be their need to be protected. Sometimes they're trying to protect themselves. And sometimes the threat is real and sometimes the threat is not real. And I think that's one of the other dangers of social media is that it presents a lot of threats that are not really threats. And when we experience one another as people, I think it's easier to determine when someone and something is really a threat. But when we see each other through words on screens or through memes, it's more difficult to determine whether something is really a threat and whether something is really a lie or the truth. And so I think that peace is something that needs to be inserted. But I think that as people of faith and people who don't have faith, but who have goodwill and desire for humans to flourish, is that we all should be committed to the idea of peace, but we should all be mindful that peace doesn't come unless there is justice coinciding with it. And so I think part of the problem and the reason that we don't have peace is because there isn't justice. And particularly in this country, there is not a history of justice for all people. And so I think I was imagining any of you who garden, and even if you don't, even if you want to make a space where you can garden, one of the basic things is you have to get rid of the weeds. And if you just get rid of the tops, the roots will still be there and more weeds will flourish. And so a fake peace or a pretend peace or an inadequate peace might be where we pull the weeds, but not by the roots. We just pretend that there is peace or clean something up and make it seem, but we have to get to the roots. And I think with the polarization, we have to get to the roots of where the anger is, where people feel they're not heard, and where there are threats real and perceived. I'm not an expert in that, but these are just my experiences of what I know people in the church that I serve and people in my family, things that they have seen on the internet, and many are not able to distinguish between what is a threat and what is not a real threat. And I know I've seen plenty of things online where I don't know, does that have a source? Where does that come from? What if somebody else saw that and acted on that? So the questions about peace are important, but they must exist in tandem with our pursuit for justice and pulling the weeds. And so I think other than that, it's a question as well for faith communities and our relationship to politics. So some faith communities are saying we are not going to use the word Republican, we're not going to use the word Democrat or anything else, libertarian. I don't know any other ones. That the US primarily has two-party system, but many faith communities will say we are not going to use those words. We're not going to talk about politics, right? Maybe you've even heard we don't talk about politics at the dining table. And that particularly has probably been true the last couple of years where politics became more contentious. So then what do faith communities do with politics? If we have faith communities that are comprised of people with that are on the spectrum of political beliefs, how do we address the issue of social polarization that is very political? How do we do that, honoring people's perspectives, but at the same time speaking truth, trying to ourselves figure out what's true and help others discern what is fact, what is not, what is a perceived threat, what is a real threat, those types of things. I think faith communities are going to have to invest more time in order to help with the spread of misinformation and also with social polarization. And so I think our role is important to do that. And, just as a Christian, I would say I follow Jesus, and I think Jesus always, I imagine that he entered a place and he said, "My peace be with you." That's very scriptural. But I also see places where he disrupted peace just by his presence, just by extending kindness, just by being attentive to people that no one else would. And so, in that way, God's peace, if we were to imagine it that way, that when God's peace enters a place, it doesn't always leave everyone feeling peaceful. And that might mean that we have to speak truth sometimes to people and to ourselves that may not make us feel comfortable in order to serve peace and justice. And so those are just some of the things that I reflect on as we reflect on what it means to be a polarized society and ways that we can address it in our faith communities.
Well, Crystal, that's definitely eye-opening. I haven't really thought of social media actually working against us and towards us, especially in faith communities. You're talking about how it can actually be used in a good manner, and how we as faith communities can work together to bring peace, just by our messages. So that's very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
So our next guest is Dr. Mehmet Sawyer. Dr. Sawyer is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at Utah State University. He is a director of Emerald Hills Institute, and he is a board member of the Interfaith Advisory Council at Utah State University. Dr. Sawyer is an environmental socialist. Dr. Sawyer is an environmental sociologist with an interest in social inequality. I'm sorry, Dr. Sawyer.
No, you don't have to be sorry. I love Karl Marx, so I'm teaching his thought. So go ahead.
We're not supposed to enter into politics, and Dr. Crystal said
you polarized it. Kidding.
So he's an environmental sociologist with an interest in social inequality. Of course, his research agenda consists of examining the critical link between community response and impacts of energy development through collective behavior, activism, and environmental inequality. He has interest in pedagogical research to work on how to enhance safe and brave spaces for exploring perceptions of marginalized groups. Dr. Sawyer, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for introducing me, Ahmet. I have known Ahmet for, I don't know, maybe 10 years back in Dallas. So thank you so much for inviting me for this panel. And let me start with appraising the in Austin. I had been in Austin a couple of times, and I love Austin, and it reminds me somewhere in Turkey give me comfort, so especially Mozart Cafe is like an antidote for social polarization. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but you can see lots of people there from different race and ethnicity, sexuality, and in religion, I suppose, and they drink their coffees, right? Beautiful coffees. So I love those places. I wish one day, I hope one day I'll be there. Okay, so social polarization. I see social polarization as a social problem. So I'm gonna take that route, and I'm gonna give some explanation about what the social problem as a sociologist, and we're gonna we're going to take a look at some of the cases from the social polarization perspective. So in sociology, we are defining as if individual, right? If individual define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So people are not looking at the evidences or not. So again, if individuals define the situations as real, right, as real, they are real in their consequences. So how you frame, right, how we frame these situations causes the action, right? And that action is subjective for sure. So actually our realities are all subjective. Yeah, most of them, they are all subjective, but we are defending our realities, right? We are defending our realities, and our society is full of anti and pro. Anti and pro of everything, right? Our society is full of that. And we're gonna get there soon. And people frame the same, quote unquote, frame the same reality from different angles. So what is right for you, it's not right for me. But we believe in that, right? We believe in that, and we are firm believer for our realities. But the reality is just a social construct that we created, right? We created. So basically, we are constantly constructing our realities, constantly constructing our realities. Maybe 5 years ago, our realities was different than now. Maybe 10 years ago, if you check your realities, right? If you check your realities 10 years ago and now, please check, right? You will see that the constructing the realities are really dynamic, right? Really dynamic, based on the norms, based on the network, based on the church that we are attending, based on the curriculum that we are reading, based on the movie that we are watching, based on the leader that we are in. Just imagine there, let's say there is a populist leader polarizing everywhere, right? So compare versus the other way around. So I'm gonna explain claims makers and claims making activity, and then I'm gonna go for the social media relations. So thanks, Crystal, for telling that the social media is, becomes monster sometime, right? But after watching the social dilemma on Netflix, I highly recommend, right? I rehabilitate myself and reconfigure the algorithm, right? And I was thinking how can I avoid becoming entrapped in that algorithm, okay? So we have claims, right? Everybody have claims. What are the claims, right? Let's say I don't like gun, but someone can love gun. Let's say you might be an anti-abortion, someone will be pro-abortion, right? Pro-choice or anti-abortion, anti-immigrant, pro-immigrant, anti-Muslim, pro-Muslim. I am giving the two sides, right? I am giving the two sides. We have lots of pros and cons, right? You have claims in the life. We have claims in our life for every situation. We are as a claims makers. We are as a claims makers, but if around our network, lots of claims makers around on Facebook, claims makers, the same opinion, the same people with the same opinion, right? Like it always creates the echo chamber. You are in that echo chamber, in that habitus, or in that silo, and you are always bombarded by those those quote unquote realities. Sometimes those realities are hateful speech. Sometimes those realities are hateful rhetoric, discriminatory, right? Or being against political correctness. So those realities are our echo chamber through our social media. You are always fed by those feeds, right? Social media, Twitter, or any media, Snapchat. If you want to reach the teenagers, use Snapchat. For sure. So these are create the echo chamber, and there is one thing: belief, perseverance. So when you start to think one idea, right? One idea, it's hard to get out of that silo because of the network effect. But you can avoid those algorithms by adding different voices. In my Facebook account, even if I don't agree with, alt-right, let's say Proud Boys, or those QAnon, right? QAnon, or those conspiracy, theory type groups, I am adding those to my Facebook. Why? Because I want to know their knowledge as well, how they frame the realities, I'm sorry, hold on.
Perhaps QAnon is coming for him.
Okay, sorry. There was a clicking or blinking, whatever. It's coming from the background noise. So we are good now. So belief, perseverance, because of the network effect, right? Because of the network effect, we are surrounded by those groups, those people around us, network, right? So we like to see what we believe in, right? We don't want to be confronted, right? We don't want to be challenged. So that's why it is like it creates those echo chamber, and those echo chamber basically echo chamber reinforce, right? Reinforcing our own ideas, our own opinions, and also reflecting our own ideas and opinions. So claims, we have claims, we have claims makers. Just imagine if your claims were supported by big leaders, big politicians, big celebrities. Just imagine how you are going to support your argument, right? Because claims makers are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And next, claims making activities. Using social media is one of the claims making activities, and also you are watching, you are listening, you are reading, right? Those are all claims making activities. You are attending demonstrations, right? Those are all, you are writing letters to the editors, right? Those are all claims making activities. You are reinforcing your own beliefs over and over and over again. So right now, I'm going to, let's say, give you like a pro-immigration. Just imagine a person, if you are pro-immigrant versus anti-immigrant, right? You are anti-immigrant person. You are watching one outlet most of the time, okay? Pro-immigrant, you are watching specific outlet most of the time. You have social media account and you are following their group, right? You are the feed that you are getting on social media. If you are anti-immigrant, always those immigrants stealing our jobs, right? I am one of the stealer. Okay, I am immigrant. So if you are coming from that background, right? those immigrants coming from Mexico and basically drug dealer or rapist, this and this. Just imagine. So you are always fed by this idea, unfortunately. On the other hand, pro-immigration, right? Diversity. We love diversity. We love people. Look at those CEO who are coming as a refugee to the, framing. Framing is important. Let's say pro-LGBTQ plus community, anti-LGBTQ plus community, pro-fracking community, right? You are from Texas, you know this. Anti-fracking community, right? So let me give one example. Pro-fracking community, anti-fracking community. One group sees the others as a pawn of the corporates, and pro-fracking group sees anti-fracking group as a tree hugger. Just imagine, like an eco-terrorist and tree hugger. They are supported by the Russia because, you know what I mean? Because those people, they don't want us to be dependent of the resources, oil and gas resources. So each frame has a logic in its mind. How do you think people believe in Pizzagate? Can you imagine people are believing in Pizzagate, and Pizzagate is basically, Democrats, like a top Democrats are in the child sex and human trafficking or whatever. Who is believing this, right? But because of the fake news, the importance of fake news, people are polarized, or QAnon, right? So these are all like a clickbait fake news, right? Clickbait fake news, those are vibrant and easy to circulate. So those are the things. And I can tell one more thing, and then I'm gonna stop here. So once we create as an institution or as a professor, as an individual, safe and brave space. Safe space is important, and the most important thing is we need to change the paradigm from safe space to brave space. That means we need to get involved, get minorities involved, and predominant population, mostly white population, get involved in a place, right? In a table, in a space to talk our differences, to talk about our commonalities. So this way, like Dialogue Institute is doing, like being a mediator, or or creating this safe and brave space to reach a peace island. Thank you.
Thank you for those wonderful words, Dr. Sawyer. We've reached the question and answer portion of our event today. We hope you've all enjoyed it. On the YouTube comment section on the left, I think, on the right on your screen, off your screen, you may submit some of your questions that we're going to ask our panels right now. Just to start us off, I'll ask my personal question, and then we can move on to the YouTube questions that come forward. So we talked about Dr. Sawyer's framing, an event, or framing, an idea, and we also talked about Crystal's importance of truth whenever whenever we are trying to create peace, long-term lasting peace. So I wanted to ask, in terms of propaganda, is it considered, propaganda, or would you be, putting people under propaganda if you try to, frame good things and framework good values and try to give out the truth to the people? I guess if that question makes sense.
Dr. Sawyer, go ahead, Dr. Sawyer. I went first.
Please, please, you go.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I would say, in my humble opinion, it is a form of propaganda to suggests that, a certain way to view the world or a particular way to view other people. And I think that we'll have strategies, right? And we have to be careful not to other people. I use the term in quotes, other people, treat them as objects when we want to communicate something. We're all human beings with experiences, and we carry those. So I don't want to treat people as objects to, propagandize them. But I do think that I do that with myself, right? And I do that with my children. And in some ways, we do have an echo chamber. And I wonder, how necessary, Dr. Sawyer, you think an echo chamber might be in order to reinforce ideas that help all humans flourish and helps equality flourish. And at what point we can all find sort of a baseline to agree that what it means to provide a space in a society where all human beings can flourish. Dr. Sawyer, who loves Marx, might be able to answer that. But I do think that it's propaganda, but I do think there is a difference between good propaganda that is helpful for human flourishing and others that is destructive. I do think there's a difference.
Yeah, we are on the same page. So with Crystal, so I love that. Yeah, it's definitely propaganda, but and also I can suggest a book, The Hype Machine. This is the author is Sinan Aral. How social media disrupts our elections, our economy, our health, and how we must adapt. So actually, if you change this hype to propaganda, yeah, the propaganda machine, actually, right? The propaganda machine. So, and also it is really dynamic. It's very dynamic. What is that? The social force. It is a very dynamic social force, and I am in Clubhouse now. So Clubhouse is another silo, but at the same time, maybe I justify my times in Clubhouse. I am listening other voices as well to understand what's going on in their world. But people, if they have a hate speech, they continue over there as well. We shouldn't diminish the idea of the political correctness. We shouldn't say whatever we have in our mind, we need to say. So there should be a filter, right? That filter is political correctness, actually. So definitely, social media is a propaganda machine. I am telling my students as well, like, racism never ends. Sometimes people are saying, oh, Barack Obama got elected, racism is over. No, racism evolves, sexism evolves, and propaganda evolves.
So we're actually having technical difficulties. They're not able to send me the questions for some reason. Oh, here we go. A question from our viewer. How should we weigh freedom of expression and some regulation to reduce the spread of misinformation? If you'd like, I could read that again. So the question is, how should we weigh freedom of expression? So how do we weigh freedom of expression and some regulation to reduce the spread of misinformation?
Crystal, you can go.
So I think that I'm going to sound a little bit critical of the United States, and I think it's fair. Part of some of the research that I've been doing most recently has to do with American history as it relates to Christianity. And one thing that I found very interesting from an author was the author's statement that American Christianity, from its inception, its arrival or disruption, we might say, here in the United States, was very much based on this idea of freedom. And so much so that the author says that American Christianity became very obsessed with freedom, almost like if freedom was a doctrine. And I think that that obsession with that ideal of what freedom is part of the problem that we have today. Because in America, there is this construct that freedom is specifically, I can do and say whatever I want to. And it isn't the freedom to care for one another. It has never been framed that way. It's rooted in this idea that I can do and say whatever I want, and that's synonymous with freedom. And I think that we have wrongly understood this thing that we have internalized in this culture, that most people have. It's a cultural construct, and it's going to be very difficult to get around. So I think that we do have to weigh it. I mean, we don't want to come to a point where we use the language of embracing authoritarianism, but it can be just as horrible and terrible to allow people to say and do whatever they want, particularly when we're dealing with people who might be suggesting that people need to die or be lynched or things like this. There has to be limits to what freedom might really mean. And the way that we have constructed it is completely flawed, particularly in American culture, is my opinion.
So for social media aspects, so there are some regulations. There are some regulations, controlling the misinformation on the social medias as well. But yeah, freedom of speech is definitely the pearl in the United States. I love that, because I came from Turkey. I know what it means to be free and what it means to exercise my rights to speak, right? So definitely, but I love check and balance in here as well. So let's say a month ago, 3 weeks ago, we had a vigil, Black Lives Matter vigil, and in downtown. I was there, and then I was, people are talking about, being black in Texas is different than being black in Utah, for sure. Okay, so blacks are really minority. I mean, the percentage is really small percentage in Utah, and especially in Logan. Whenever you see a black person, you were like amazed. Wow, there's one black person I saw. So this place is, there are less minority, black minority. Sorry. We were there, and we were shouting at like a Black Lives Matter, and people were driving by and using the horn and saying all lives matter. Okay, it's not the point. Definitely all lives matter, but what we are doing in here is supporting black people. So that's why we are saying Black Lives Matter, because they are marginalized, because they are discriminated against, or like a police brutality or this and this, right? So, but what I like is the other people, right? The other people with a different opinion, they are exercising their right to speak as well, without violence, right? Without violence. So I guess without violence, everyone should say anything they want without violence. I mean, since there's a check and balance system, right? Check and balance system. If there's a misinformation spread about me by specific outlet, I can sue that outlet, right? I can sue that broadcasting or whatever. So if if there is a law in the system, I believe there's a law, right? Yeah, I believe there's a law. So I don't think there will be a big problem on that.
Absolutely. Our next question comes as this. To mitigate polarization, it seems that we need to bring people with opposing ideas together. Can you comment on your ideas on how to accomplish this and practice it in a safe way?
Okay, I can start, Crystal, if you're okay. So actually, the questions are really smart questions and also tough questions, by the way. Okay, so this is the area that I like. There is a what is that professional job as a conflict resolution, right? Conflict resolutionist. If there's a conflict resolution between let's say among two groups over religion, over I don't know, in a micro level to macro level, right? And I can give I can give an example what my plan in the future, especially in Utah. Utah's lands are 70% of the lands are federal land in here. 75%. It's a huge, okay? 75 land. So some of the lands are indigenous land, right? Indigenous land, and especially southern Utah it is gorgeous. Forrest Gump, the movie Forrest Gump was broadcast was filmed in that place as well. So the thing is, one government comes and says, okay, I'm going to open this federal land for the corporations without asking the locals' opinion. Locals' opinion means there are different opinions. Indigenous populations, especially Navajo nations, they are thinking different, okay? But another government comes and says, okay, we're going to protect the land, okay, on the benefit of the indigenous population. So my plan for the future, it's kind of similar idea to create a safe embrace space. How? Like a town hall meeting. Let's say I'm going to go there as a conflict resolutionist, right? As a conflict resolutionist, and I'm going to create a space, but this space will be intergenerational space, not just adult, but also younger generations as well. Okay, not just adult, but younger generations as well. And they are going to discuss the issue. Okay, they are going to discuss the local issues or land use controversy with their officials, elected officials. Elected officials will be in the same place, right? And as a facilitator, as a moderator, or as a conflict resolutions, whatever. I'm going to create that, not by myself, with my colleagues and also students, researchers, right? And create that space to discuss, right? At least discuss, talk, and make a report out of it, and then share those reports with the regulators. So I can stop in here, and yeah, this is what my plan would be.
So yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, I would definitely agree there needs to be public forums like that do provide a safe space. Whereas to the expectations are that there are conversations that are going to happen, they're going to be difficult, and that are done in a setting as to mitigate the presence of physical violence. One thing that I linger on is while and this is going back a little bit, but while I feel like freedom of speech is very, very important, and I wouldn't want to change that for any nation, I do think that we have to be mindful of the power that words and actions have as far as violence, even when they're not physical violence. And so I think that even, for example, denying the ownership of land is a form of violence, for example. And so I think that those things have to be kept in mind. But I think in addition to public forums like that, I think that, as I mentioned, the image of the weeds earlier, a lot of the issues that we have that relate to social polarization inevitably go back to issues of white supremacy and race in this country, specifically in this country. And so if we look at what happened, for example, in South Africa or places in Guatemala where there was genocide of the Mayan people, for example, in Guatemala, there have been truth and reconciliation commissions. That is something the United States has never, ever done, despite its history of chattel slavery, which still has, more than residue hundreds of years later. And then we're not that far off from the civil rights movement, when even Malcolm X was calling for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but the United States wanted someone internally to do it. And that, he said, wasn't going to fly. And why should it? Why should someone internal to the United States do something like that? And I think that that would be one way to try and do something. I know that I want to acknowledge that in South Africa, a lot of people were not satisfied, not that they should have been, but there was still feelings of hurt and anger after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did its work. But I do think it's something the United States has never attempted to do. And because of the reality that so much of our polarization is rooted in these problems with racism and inequality as it relates to race, I think a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for what has happened, for example, to Black Americans in this country, going back couple hundred centuries, right, to chattel slavery, 16th century chattel slavery. And I think that we need to also think about that as it relates to immigration and detention centers, because we have people from around the globe in the detention centers in the United States. And so I think that that would be a very necessary and public way to address harm, speak truth, and look towards healing.
Thank you, Crystal and Dr. Thank you, Crystal and Dr. Sawyer. I don't have any questions for you. So do you have any additional comments or closing remarks you'd like to make?
Crystal,
None?
please.
All right, then I'll just conclude. Today we talked about social media. Social media can be a tool. Freedom of speech is important, but it doesn't necessitate violence or instigation or hurting others. We also need to ask ourselves, look at our history and our founding ideas and ask ourselves, what is our core values? Once again, we really need to have that conversation. Especially something like a reconciliation dialogue might actually help us get there. We need to make local conversation spaces, safe spaces as well. And we need to deal with underlying issues that root from perhaps other issues. So what types of things create racism? For example, a lower class white man might not be able to find a job, and he might find the reasoning being in racism, perhaps. As one of the solutions stated by our speakers is to weave yourself into the fabric of local communities and interact with the people around you. I hope that was a good summary. I'm not a PhD level like you guys are, but I tried my best.
You did a great job. Ahmed, come on, you did a great job. Great, wonderful.
Thanks. So we thank our viewers for coming in, and we thank our speakers for coming as well. Everyone, we hope you have a nice one.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Very nice to meet you, Crystal. And thank you so much for inviting Ahmed.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.